Hi, I'm here with Amanda Thomas, who is the owner of Amanda Thomas Mediations. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, really, that's it. My name is Amanda Thomas. I am the owner of Amanda Thomas Mediations. I have been mediating since 2014 in the small claims area, and then started to mediate in domestic in 2016. And I've been doing it ever since.
That's great. Well, I got a couple of questions here for you.
Sure.
Okay, so the first one, I've never been through a civil court proceeding before. What is mediation in that context? How does that all work?
Sure. So mediation in the civil area is depending on what side of that is, if it's domestic with divorce versus small claims. Um, I mean, really, it's kind of the same across the board. It's just a confidential meeting between the parties with a neutral third party facilitator who helps to get the parties talking and facilitate conversation.
Wow, that's pretty cool. What should I expect to happen in mediation? If I've
Sure.
never done something like that, what are my expectations? What should they be?
Sure. So it kind of depends both of those on whether it's small claims or divorce. For divorce, it can be a lengthy process. I usually tell my parties to expect anywhere from 2 to 4 hours or longer for mediation. With mediation, you should expect to meet either in person or in a room virtually, like we are right now. With that, it kind of depends on a lot of factors. A mediator will usually go over an agreement to mediate. And then from there, it's such a unique process for each mediator on how you go from starting to finish.
Okay, how should I prepare for mediation? So I like, what if I've been called to mediation, or my lawyer and opposing counsel decide mediation is something that can work, and we've decided on that. How does it work?
Sure. So usually in mediation, if you both have attorneys, most of the time the attorneys have done all the work for you. They have all your bank statements, they have all your taxes, they have your W-2s, they have everything that you guys have provided to them up until that point. Really, your preparation is just coming with an open mind and being willing to try to work out any type of an agreement that you feel like is in your best interest. Mediation is your time to really be able to make your decisions and not have somebody else decide the outcome of your divorce.
Okay, so I've got a couple of hypothetical questions.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm ready to settle, but the opposing party is unwavering. What can I do? What should I do?
Sure. That's really a tough question. In mediation, you really can't force anyone to come to a resolution. Um, the best bet, honestly, if a party is really that unwilling to move, is to have a judge hear your case. Mediators can often do a lot of things, which is really listening to what a party has to say and like repeating it back in a different way. Oftentimes, parties that are in conflict just can't hear what another party is saying. They don't want to have any part of it. So, when it comes to a neutral third party who's repeating something slightly different, oftentimes you can get maybe a little bit of movement, but sometimes there's parties who just honestly can't move past unless they have somebody tell them what they want to do. And in that situation, no amount of mediation or trying to negotiate is going to work because they're stuck in that position.
Okay, how often does that kind of happen? Is that just all of them? Everybody,
No, no, sure. So there are some people, I mean, more often than not, I see it in like small claims area where somebody is just so, we call it entrenched. They're just so into that moment that they're right, that they can't see reason that everybody else is wrong and they know they're right. And oftentimes they have to have somebody else tell them, hey, you're not going to win this issue. Oftentimes with divorce, if attorneys are involved, it's very likely that that won't happen. It's most often with pro se parties who I can't tell them, hey, this is what like your options are. I will play devil's advocate and Try to really get them like, okay, what happens if a judge doesn't side with you? What's your options? What are you going to do? To try to get them to like really think about that and think, is this something that I really think is set? And if it is, then they'll still stay in their position. But oftentimes that'll help get people moving. Like I said, with attorneys, it doesn't happen as much because attorneys will tell their clients this, like, we need to make some negotiations on this.
Okay. Okay. Got another hypothetical for you.
Sure.
What do I do if I don't want to be in the same room as the opposing party, or if they have like a restraining order on me? How does
Sure.
that all work out?
Okay, so first off, if a restraining order is in place, it's key to let the mediator know immediately. I always request to see the paperwork just so I can visually verify that a restraining order has allowed for mediation. If it doesn't allow for mediation, I won't go any further than that. I will let the parties know, or the party that's contacted me, that they need to go back to court and have a judge reissue the restraining order with the option to allow for mediation. If the box is allowed for mediation, there are a couple of things that I'll do. One of the things that I can do is we'll meet via Zoom, and then I can have the parties be in breakout rooms where they don't have to see each other, and I just go back and forth for shuttle. If we have to meet in person for some reason, I will try to do two separate rooms. And in that case, with the two separate rooms, it depends on how like the restraining order is. I would really look into and ask questions as soon as I found out there was a restraining order, if there was any kind of domestic violence that I needed to be made aware of. Those things would then change how I would arrange seating, how I would arrange people to arrive. I always have my victims arrive last and leave first so that they're not anywhere near where the perpetrator is. The perpetrator is in a separate room that's not within visual distance of the victim. And I always make sure that, like, if there's anything that my victim needs, that like to feel more secure about coming into a room, that I try to put those things in place. Other than that, like, really, Zoom has allowed for a lot more advocacy for, in my opinion, victims to not have to be in the same room and have that power not be there, by having a perpetrator be in the same room. So Zoom's really helped a lot in the sense of being able to mediate with people who have restraining orders or are victims of domestic violence.
Yeah, it seems like it would add like a layer of separation so that
It
they could be a little
does.
more comfortable
Yeah.
facing that kind of person.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have one last hypothetical for you.
Sure.
If I don't have an attorney, how do I know if I'm making a bad deal? How do I know I'm not getting screwed?
Sure. So because I'm just a mediator, that sounds terrible, but I am just a mediator. Because of that, at the end of mediation, I always write what's called an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding. It's a document that I provide to my parties of all the agreements that we've come to. I never have my parties sign anything. So at the end of the day, they take that and I ask them to find an attorney who can review that and go over that with them and make sure that they're making a sound legal decision. I never have my parties sign anything legally binding because I don't want them to not have that attorney option to have them say, yes, this is a good deal. This is what's in your best interest. I try to do what the parties come to an agreement on, but just because that's what the parties agreed on doesn't mean that's what's the best legally for them. So I always advise them to find somebody who can review this and talk with you about it. And then if that sounds good to them, sign off on it and then go to the next step.
Okay, really cool. What training do mediators go through to be a mediator?
Sure. So no two mediators' journeys are the same. Oftentimes retired judges become mediators and they're kind of just allowed in there to do that, which is totally fine. Like, they can do that, but that's not the path that I went through. I actually went through the University of Utah and got a certificate in conflict resolution. That allowed me to be able to mediate small claims issues for the court. After that, I went through UDR, which is pretty much kind of everybody's path from after small claims forward. which is Utah Dispute Resolution. They have a yearly domestic training. You have to go through their domestic training, which they have, like, I think I said it's once a year at their building, and you do that. And then after that, you have to find a master mediator who is willing to mentor you. And then they have to mentor you for so many hours, so many mediations. They have you watch while they mediate, and then they co-mediate with you, and then they watch you mediate and give feedback. And then from there, you can apply to be on the Utah court roster for mediators, which is what I am.
That's actually really cool. I didn't know it was that involved.
It's pretty involved.
It's cool. How do you help people calm down and focus on the negotiation process when things get heated or get kind of out of hand? When people start getting really crazy, how does that work out?
Sure. So first off, I always try to start my expectations for the parties, what I expect of them at the very beginning of mediation. I expect them to be honest, courteous towards me and each other. If emotions really get high intense, I will often ask parties, like, I'm going to take a break. Like, I need a break for a second, and put it on me so that they don't feel like it's them that's having the issue. That, hey, I need a break real quick. Like, let me get a drink of water. Let me do this. And then I will often, if we're all in one room, we'll say, hey, let me do a mediation just for a minute where I'm going to talk to each party separately. And then I will do that. Or if I'm in Zoom, I will do a breakout session, and I'll just go back and forth and see if I can figure out what's causing them to have those high emotions, and then see what I can do to help them. And sometimes it's just as simple as breaking them apart, that they just didn't want to see the other person anymore. And then in that case, then we'll just mediate from that point forward in separate rooms.
Okay. Have you ever had a time where the mediation has just gone off the rails and gotten out of hand? How do you handle it when you've jumped 3 or 4 tracks away and you're really trying to just bring them back to the point at hand?
Sure. So usually most of the parties that I deal with are pro se parties. I had a situation where things got out of hand, but in the instance, it was the attorney who kind of flew off the handle and lost his marbles. And I was like, look, I'm like so grateful that you guys are here, but this is my process. Like, you guys aren't going to be in charge. This is my show. And kind of brought the attorney back around and was like, if you want to do this, like, we'll do this. If not, like, we'll just call it and you guys can go and talk to the judge. It was a small claims case. And once I kind of put him in his place, it went great after that. And we ended up settling. So that was awesome. But in terms of pro se parties, most of the time, none of them really go off too far. And if they do, I try to bring them back by asking questions about what I was really interested in the first place. Sometimes with parties, they really just need to have their story told. And as silly as it is, like, it's my job to listen to that story and try to really pick out what they're saying so that I can help them really find what my answer was to that question. So I think that's really it, like, is just listening to your parties and really seeing where they're going with stories or why they're going off on tangents and how to bring them back.
Okay. What advice do you have for people going to mediation for the first time?
Sure. So my advice is always the same that I give to my parties at the beginning of every mediation. I always tell them, please don't come to an agreement just to say you came to an agreement. I always try to remind my parties that this agreement, like whatever it is legally binding once they get it signed, and they really need to gut check themselves and say, is this something that I can do? Not just now, especially in divorce, but in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if they have young children. I don't want to see my parties come back to mediate with me because I wasn't thorough enough, and making sure that they really gut checked themselves on, is this something that I can see lasting? So my advice really is just to listen to yourself and really think, is this something that I can do long term? And if it's not, let's tweak it until you feel like you could do something long term.
Okay. Has there ever been a time you've recommended against mediation Like people have come there, you've heard their stories, and you're just like, you guys need to settle this somewhere else.
Um, okay, so maybe. There are times, like especially in small claims, where even after like 5 minutes of them talking, I'm like, okay, this isn't going to go anywhere. I'm just going to send you guys back to the judge because they're, as I used the word earlier, entrenched. They know they're right. Nothing's willing to break them, and they just need somebody to tell them who it is and who's won and who's going to win. So in that case, like for sure, I'm like, okay, great. But there are times where I've talked with parties just recently, like back and forth via email, and we're trying to get a date, and one party's super demanding and isn't willing to negotiate, like even on like the day or the time. And for them, I was just like, I'm not sure that I'm the right person for you, because for me, I'm not willing to say, well, this is what you're going to do. I was like, you guys are probably going to have to find attorneys. Like, there's not a whole lot more I can do from you guys if you guys are demanding separate things and not willing to compromise on even a day and time of mediation and who can even be involved. And in that case, I just told them, like, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. And I haven't heard back yet. So,
Well, that's kind of crazy. Yeah. Well, that's all of my questions.
sure.
Wonderful.